Welcome back. So today we're going to continue our discussion about ecological pyramids, and we've already discussed DDT, and so actually we'll start here. I just like this diagram here. It's just, again, the ecological pyramid just really emphasizes, really illustrates, I mean to say, how DDT increased, not only was passed up the food chain, but was increased in its concentration by 10 million times. That's pretty significant. So, food and human population. The last units that we're going to look at for the last modules we're going to look at in this unit deal with human population and human consumption. And maybe you've talked about this issue in another class, maybe even an economics class, a religion class, a philosophy class, is the problem of human population growth. And one valid question would be, well, how many humans can the Earth feed? So let's take a look at the typical American food chain. So we are the breadbasket of the world. That's what we're called. We produce literally tons and tons of grain every year. Now, we can't eat our grain directly, but hey, a lot of us, and myself included, prefer to eat a nice juicy steak. You know, a lot of people like hamburgers too, and so what we do is we feed our grain to cows, and then we feed the cows to humans. That would be humans right there. All right, so let me ask you this question then. And I'm not going to write out humans. All right, if we would take the same amount of grain, and you know I'm not the artist by this point in the course, right, and feed it directly to humans, do you think we could feed more humans, fewer humans, or the same number of humans? So why don't you think about that for a second? Did you say more humans? Well, you would be correct. If we fed the grain directly to humans, then we could theoretically feed 10 times more humans. So when you can quote me in another class, whether it's a science class or that, when the question is how much food can how many humans can the Earth feed? The answer is really clear cut. The answer is it depends. It depends on how each of the 7 billion people inhabiting our planet choose to eat. So if all 7 people in our planet would eat the typical American diet, we would crash very quickly. We would not have the resources to support that. However, if all 7 billion people ate like the traditional meal in like maybe China or other developing countries, but diets that emphasize grain and vegetables and maybe just eat a little bit of meat here and there, well then we could support several more billion people. So there's one thing to sort of chew on, right? How many people could the Earth feed? Now, when we get into the issue of human population, there's just a lot of confounding factors. And some people are real hardcore and they say, oh, all humans should be vegetarian. And I really don't know that I agree with that, because there's some places in the world where you can't really grow crops too well, but you can raise goats, right? And for those people, they might be living in poverty, except that they have goat meat to eat and goat milk to drink. So, but I do want to take this a little bit further and examine the second question. Is meat a luxury item? Now, when I say luxury, what do you think of? You know, maybe you think of, I don't know, do you think of a really fancy iPad or something? Or do you think of an all-inclusive vacation? Or do you think of like sitting in a hot spa with a glass of wine or fine jewelry? I don't know. You know, luxury is usually something that we don't technically need, but we think is really, really nice. Now, most of us probably don't consider meat to be a luxury item, but your book does a nice job of pointing this out. In terms of the amount of natural resources it takes to produce meat, it actually is a luxury item. Because as we've talked about with this 10% rule, I mean, really converting grain biomass to cow biomass and then cow biomass to human biomass is actually not very efficient. If efficiency is what you're after. Again, I love my nice juicy steak. So we have to balance different questions in here. But efficiency is important as the world's population grows. And so, like I said, let's explore this issue by what do we mean by meat as a luxury item. Meat, especially beef, for instance, it takes roughly 8 pounds of grain to produce 1 pound of beef. All right, now other meat, there's a higher conversion rate. It only takes about 4 pounds of pork to make, or 4 pounds of grain to make 1 pound of pork, about 3 pounds of grain to make 1 pound of chicken. When we get down to fish, remember fish are ectotherms. They don't need to use food energy to maintain a constant body temperature. So you get actually pretty close to 1-to-1 ratio. Obviously not exactly 1-to-1 ratio converting grain to fish. Now, like I said, we are the breadbasket of the world, but how much of our grain do you think we actually use to feed humans directly? It might surprise you. 70% of the grain grown in the United States is fed to livestock versus human directly. So again, 70%, and I've read different figures, they vary, but it seems to be consistent. About 70% of the grain we produce is used to feed livestock. And additionally, well, let's see, next module, we will talk about the water cycle. And if we live in Dayton, Ohio, which I do right now, we are sort of in the Saudi Arabia of fresh, pure, clean drinking water. We live on one of the biggest, purest, cleanest, most abundant aquifers in the world. But that's not true everywhere. In fact, even out west, I have relatives that live out in Colorado, and water is a lot more scarce out there, and there's competing interest. Is water used for household use? Is it used for agriculture? Is it used for hotels? So water rights is really a huge, huge issue. And so it might surprise you that 50% of the fresh water in the United States is, again, used to support livestock. So you can see in terms of consumption of natural resources, meat is expensive. It's a luxury item. And typically, traditionally, our appetite for meat, especially beef in the United States, has been so ravenous. We've actually imported 10% of our beef. Now, I don't know where everybody's from who's listening to this, but a lot of American students, at least, they learn in grade school. It's like, oh, this is terrible deforestation of the tropical rainforest in Central and South America. Oh, this is horrible to the biosphere, which actually it is. But not everybody also learns one of the driving forces for deforestation is to burn the forest in order to plant grassland to feed cattle to be sold to American fast food hamburger industries. So yeah. So in that way too, meat can be a very expensive item ecologically. So maybe you don't care about any of this, and that's fine, and maybe after you study for your final exam you won't be concerned about ecological pyramids. But another thing that we'll point out in the last module is that a lot of developing countries are developing very quickly economically, like China, for instance. I don't know that you actually consider China a developing country, but this still has been the traditional diet, more grain and vegetable based. However, they're also the growing economic power. And as peoples around the world gain more affluence, who do they tend to emulate? Good old Uncle Sam, good old USA. So when you have billions of people globally moving from an ecological pyramid on the right-hand side, moving to this one on the left-hand side, well, basic economics, supply and demand. As you put more demand on resources like grain and meat, price goes up. And just last week on the radio, I heard that the meat price is going up due to demand in different parts of the world. Now, I'm going to address another issue, and I'm just going to use a blank screen. I was, and we're still going to talk about meat. One time I got on a teaching evaluation, the comment, I'm tired of hearing if I'm going to go to hell if I eat a piece of meat. And really, I don't think I ever said that. So let's be clear. What are the positives of meat? In fact, why am I using red on blue? It would probably be much nicer if I used yellow. So, excuse me, what are the benefits of meat? Well, hopefully you know that meat is a great source of protein. Do you remember the building blocks of proteins? Not allowed to forget anything in biology. Amino acids. If you eat a piece of meat, you get all 20 amino acids. All right, and so that's important to a lot of people. So like if I decided I wanted to be vegetarian tomorrow, maybe I would just eat all popcorn all day long, and I would really enjoy that. However, remember, Plants are the producers of the ecosystems, and not only do they trap energy, they produce the monomers from scratch, the nucleotides, the amino acids. And there's some amino acids my body just cannot even make from scratch. I have to get them from my diet. And so if I eat a piece of meat, I get all 20 amino acids, or at least all my essential amino acids, the one I can't make. But if I eat corn all day, no, I'm going to be deficient in an amino acid or two. Same thing if I would eat rice all day. So if you know anyone who's vegetarian, they may be aware of a concept called complementary proteins. So if I eat nothing but rice all day, I'll be missing an amino acid in my diet. But if I always eat beans with my rice, I will get all the amino acids. I will get a complete protein. And what's sort of interesting is every culture in the world has developed without knowing anything about proteins or amino acids, every culture has developed its own set of complementary proteins. So a lot of people around the world eat beans and rice together, and they will get all essential amino acids. And in the United States, a lot of kids grow up putting milk on their cornflakes. Well, if you have milk with your corn, you'll get all essential amino acids. But you don't have to worry about that if you eat a nice steak, because you will get that is a complete protein. All right, another reason, a benefit of eating meat, especially beef, it is a good source of iron. Right, the chemical symbol for iron is Fe. And especially if you're a cycling woman and you lose blood every month, it's really important to replenish your iron. And it's much better to do that with your diet, like with a piece of meat, than through a vitamin pill. It's just assimilated into your body much more efficiently. So there are actually some very good reasons for us to eat meat. Now go ahead, you know I can't see you, but go ahead, raise your finger if you just love a nice juicy steak. Yeah, I thought so. Most of us really do love a nice juicy steak. And you know what? You do not have to be ashamed of that, even though meat is a luxury item in terms of your consumption of natural resources, because our craving for meat is our evolutionary heritage. If you think about it, you know, back in the hunter and gatherer stage, which is easier to do? Gather berries and dig up roots, you know, potatoes and tubers and stuff that you've planted, or to go hunt that mastodon or hunt that deer? Well, I think it's easier to gather your food. And so the only reason that typically humans put in a lot of effort, this E is going to represent effort, to catch game, is because they had a high craving. The humans that had a high craving for meat lived because they also put in the huge effort to get meat. These humans that had a low craving for meat, well, they just died. So yeah, this is not any kind of freak coincidence, right? We are genetically programmed to think meat tastes really, really good. So let's fast forward to current times. So again, you're not allowed to forget evolution. You're not allowed to forget anything in biology. Currently, we still have our evolutionarily high craving for meat. This is our genetic heritage. But does it still take a lot of effort to get meat? Are you kidding? We can drive through rallies, get 5 big boofers in 5 minutes. So we still have this high craving for meat. It takes a low effort. And the result is most Americans over-consume meat. Most Americans probably eat more meat than is healthy. What are the top 3 killers of Americans? I'll tell you. Heart disease, cancer, and stroke. It's not a government secret. Look it up for yourself. Heart disease, cancer, and stroke. And it's no secret what causes these. As far as the cardiovascular diseases, heart disease and stroke, by diets too high in saturated fats are contributing factor, and too high in cholesterol. And both of these are associated with meat and animal products. Plants do not have cholesterol in their plasma membrane. Plants have unsaturated fats versus saturated fats. So yes, our overconsumption of meat definitely contributes to our cardiovascular disease. It's been estimated that up to perhaps 1 million American deaths a year are caused by our diet alone. I mean, if a foreign country was doing to ourselves what we're doing to ourselves, it would be declared an act of war. And so, again, as we move throughout this ecology unit, I think it's just really important that it's like a lot of this stuff is a balancing act. I mean, a lot of people are personally vegetarian, and I think that's great, but I don't think it has to be all or nothing. But on the other hand, If we eat like we're carnivores, which we're not, we're omnivores, there are severe health consequences to ourselves as human beings. So again, it's probably not what you expected in little ecology units. So again, once we understand this little ecological pyramid, it has all sorts of implications for our lives, how we live, and for basically how we're going to live as the human species. And that's all I have to say for now. I'll meet you in the next module.